In the process of creating the United States Constitution, Americans faced several issues which were debated continually until a solution could be established. Some of these issues that were debated included whether or not to abolish the Articles of Confederation completely, concerns regarding the representation of the states, and finally, the issue of slavery and its impact on representation. But before we get into these issues, let's briefly talk about the conditions of the states and national government which led to the actual need for a new written constitution. Immediately following America's Declaration of Independence, each of the 13 colonies created their own state constitutions which would outline the government they would live under. Although these constitutions had good intentions at first, they would not prove successful. To put it simply, George Washington stated this: "The inefficiency of state governments indicates we have errors to correct." Such errors consisted of the struggles states had to create equality of power among their branches of government, the struggles the states also had to come to agreements on the worth of their money, and on the national level, the economy battled to survive as trades between states and foreign countries were cut off. The national government also had problems paying off its debts from the Revolutionary War, and because of the Articles of Confederation, the national government was very weak and unable to establish order and stability. The states had all the power and wanted to keep it that way. This had to change, of course, if America was going to survive, so a convention was called. Each of the 13 states would send delegates to the convention composing of about 55 total delegates in attendance. Initially, they were to try and revise and strengthen the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation created by the states were vague and weak. They were originally created mostly for the security of staying away from too strong of a national government, which would have just resulted in what the states had hoped to leave behind them in Britain. On the flip side, the states also wanted to keep the power and independence they already had over the national government. Delegates soon realized, however, and agreed that a completely new constitution would need to be written, therefore abolishing the Articles of Confederation altogether, hence the name Constitutional Convention, a meeting in which a brand new constitution would be written. Another important issue debated was that of representation. The bigger states, such as Virginia, wanted a plan that would represent their large population of people fairly, giving them more votes because they had more people. On the other hand, the smaller states knew that if this happened, that the larger states would have an unfair advantage over the smaller states. After weeks of debate, they came to an agreement known as the Great Compromise. The solution was this: first, the House of Representatives would allow large states to have more votes based on their population to satisfy their demands. Second, the Senate would give all states equal votes satisfying the requests of the smaller states. And third, bringing both together, the Senate and the House of Representatives would have to meet and come to an agreement before a law was actually passed. Out of all the issues and compromises that made up the Constitution, one of probably the most controversial was that of slavery. Slavery was very active in the states during this time period, but more so in the South than in the North. Therefore, the southern states would argue that slaves should be counted as part of the population because they knew that the greater population would secure them more seats in the House of Representatives. The northern states saw this as a way that the southern states could have an advantage, which in reality they really would have. So the North argued that they should not be counted as part of the population, but rather as property. To settle this controversial debate, a compromise was suggested, then later accepted, known as the 3/5 Compromise. The southern states would get 3 votes to every 5 slaves. However, they would also be taxed 3/5 of their value to make it fair to the northern states. This somewhat settled the issue, but neither side really got all of what they wanted. Let's recap. The states were in complete chaos before the new Constitution was created. Greed, pride, and fear would soon lead to America's destruction unless changes were made. It was not easy and was a long process, but after much debate and coming to an agreement to abolish the Articles of Confederation completely, develop a fair representation between the large and the smaller states, and how to count slaves into that representation, on September 17, 1787, in Independence Hall, Pennsylvania, an important document would be signed uniting all the states and national government together. Its title, the Constitution of the United States of America.